Would you trade your freedom and happiness for all the money and fame in the world until they see the life of Michael Jackson? Imagine this, having it all. Global fame, billion of fans, and more money than you could ever spend. It sounds like a dream, right? But the reality was much darker. Michael reached the top of the world, yet he found himself incredibly lonely and in deep pain. Was it worth sacrificing his life for that success? The new Michael biopic doesn't give us a straight answer. In real life, he said he wouldn't change his journey for anything. But once you see the sheer magnitude of his suffering, you might think differently. In this video, why his life was on a level of reality most of us can't even imagine. Now let's talk about the movie itself. This biopic is made for you dance, enjoy, and celebrate the man who was the king. He was the best at what he did, even if his life was marked by this trauma. The film is a tribute to his legacy. It feels less like a standard drama and more like a massive concert. It covers his entire discography from the early days to his peaks. I think until this back. So if you don't start moving your feet or you're shaking your shoulder while watching this, something like I mean, what the hell it happened to you? You might want to check your pulse because you're not alive with this. If you don't check it out, I had blood watching it. The energy is so high that many fans are actually dancing in the theater, and I can get a bit chaotic and some people on TikTok and making fun of it, but that is the point. Michael music still moves the world. And the movie focuses on the myth of Michael Jackson. There's a scene where he explains why he avoids interviews because he wanted to remain a mystery and legendary figure. Now, a quick head up. If you're looking for a deep psychological character study like, the Elvis movie, you might be disappointed. You won't find many secret facts here. Most of what on screen is common knowledge you can find on the internet and ChatGPT and all that. Is it basic? Maybe, but the pacing is spectacular. Ain't never boring. It's constantly moving, and the most importantly, it will make you want to dance and and want more about the music of Michael Jackson, and that is something great. Even if you're not the type to get up and dance in the theater, and this movie does something to you. It's a vibe I've never felt with any other biopic. But let's be real. This film doesn't deep dive into Michael's private life. If you want to know the man in the mirror, you still need to watch documentaries and read, his interview. This movie is about the legacy, the music, and how he changed the world. You'll understand his general personality, but it doesn't explore his highest heights and lowest lows. The way, the way the Elvis movie did. It stays on the surface of his human side to focus on his artistic music. So a lot of people are complaining why I didn't take about the allegation. Well, here's the thing. This movie is only the first part of the story. Michael started working at 6 years old. His life was so massive they could have made 5 movies about him. But take it easy. So the first installment ends before the period of the accusation. So it would be ridiculous to demand a story that hadn't happened yet. In the film, the timeline. The screen literally said Michael Jackson will return in Avengers Doomsday. So we had to wait for part 2 to, watch this allegation and all that and how it affected Michael's life. And there are also the legal side song of his real life accuser had legal restriction regarding how they can be mentioned in films, documentary, and a lot of display or whatever. We don't know yet if the sequel can mention these persons or will use different names. It's a complicated situation, and we will see what happens in the future. To wrap this up, for me the movie is a solid 10 out of 10. Yes, guys, it's really great. It's a complete experience from start to finish. It never gets boring because it's constantly feeding your facts, legendary musics, and iconic concert moments. Now you're expecting, something deep and raw like a Bohemian Rhapsody or Elvis, you might feel it's a bit basic. If that's what you're looking for, you might give it up a 7 or an 8. But for me, seeing the King of Pop back on the big screen is a perfect 10 out of 10. And I had to admit that even with that, for me, the best biopic is Elvis. But it's a great movie. Michael is a super great biopic with super legendary music that you need to watch. So now we need to talking about the other phase and my opinion. So let's get into a heavy stuff. Let's talk about my honest opinion of the allegation. So how can people be so quick to judge Michael Jackson without understanding the trauma that shaped his mind? I still see people making bold claims about him, and I had to ask, how can you be so sure? Yes, it's true that Michael loved being around children and sharing the stage with them. He truly believed that the children were the key to ending the world and the violence in the world. He felt that protecting childhood was the most important thing on earth. But we had to look at why he thought in this way. The movie and his real life show us a kid who started working at 6 years old. Thinking about that, most 6 years working that hard are usually in extreme poverty. Now imagine that, same life, but with a constant psychological violence and physical violence. If Michael made that a step in a dance routine, for example, he was hit. He had no Christmas, no birthday, no son-to-son freedom. He was working from 8 to 5 and then probably standing in between. He was robbed of his childhood. Before he even turned 10, which is when he recorded ABC, 1, 2, 3, and all that, So then he became a multimillionaire overnight. Imagine that. We've seen what happened to Hollywood child stars like Lindsay Lohan and many others. They lost their grip on reality. But Michael's case was even more extreme. You had a boy who was physically abused, then suddenly became a global icon chased by massive crowds. He couldn't walk down the street without people grabbing, kissing, or pulling at him. In my view, he was a man who was mentally broken. And this is the part many people miss. Michael was treated as a product his entire life. First by his father who exploited him for money, and then later by the entire Hollywood industry. Everyone wanted something from him. A favor from the record label, or a loan or a piece of his fame. Everything was about money. When you lose your humanity because everyone sees you as a brand, you cling to what was stolen from you. Michael's obsession with childhood wasn't about something dark. It was about a Peter Pan syndrome, a desperate need to experience the life had never had. He wasn't just a star, He was a human being who was never allowed to grow up on his own terms. Michael was the most extreme case of a human being losing their identity to become a product. And even in the real life, we see a moment where his friend had to empty out an entire grocery store just so he can experience what it's like to shop. Think about that for a second. Before you judge him, can you even fathom a life where you never stepped foot in a supermarket? It's insane. Since he was a child, he didn't have birthday or Christmas. He only had word and violence. It's only logical that he spent his adulthood trying to reclaim the childhood that was stolen from him. People forget that the kids he invited to Neverland were often terminally ill. Children fighting cancer who just wanted a moment of joy. It's crazy how the media, long before the internet, created those toxic narratives. When I first heard the myth of Michael, and that is something real personal, it was, the story of a black man who didn't want to be black, and that turned himself a white guy. Imagine what fucking crazy that was new. Was absolutely ridiculous. A fucking lie. And where was the talk about the vitiligo? Where was the mention of his lupus? Nothing. And why not? He only found, friendship in the childhood and this little kid with terminally little. Only like a friendship, and not only a friendship that you and me with normal life know about. You talk with his friend, your secret, and the stuff that bothers you and all that. And just talk about play and pass a great time with video game and story magic and all that. It's only that. It's not a real friendship if you think about it. So why not a little peace and freedom in this little moment? I don't know. If for me, that's what happened with Michael and the child. So the press and the paparazzi ignored his medical reality to sell headline about a man hating his own skin and all this abuse that is incredible, something gross. So guys, excuse me if I'm skeptical when those same sources talk about the allegation. Is it not more likely that people saw a vulnerable, wealthy man and decide to take advantage of him? So, if you're going to form an opinion, don't let it be based on a stupid headline. First of all, inform yourself and later make a decision. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Michael was a perfect saint. He was a complex person with a strong character. And actually, I think, he fight for his right and, deal with powerful elites, in my opinion, of course. And we can't even begin to understand he rubbed shoulder with, world leader and royalty living in a sphere far beyond our reality. So for me, that fight with the elites is completely true. He was a man with deep trauma and mental health struggle that should have been treated. But why were they? Because if Michael had taken time off of, to therapy, he wouldn't have been making millions for his family, his label, and everyone else profiting from him. They prefer to look the other way and let him medicate himself as long as the concert kept going. He was exploited by the industry until the very end. At the end of the day, the movie is a 10 out of 10 for me. I don't believe he was an abuser. I believe he was a victim, physically and psychologically, abused by an industry that saw him as a machine and not as a man. He was the king, but he paid the ultimate price for his crown. Let me know what do you think about this biopic, if you like it or not. And again, for me, it's a 10 out of 10. If you want something deep and to know this legend, I think it's a 7 or 8. But in overall, a 10 out of 10. And remember to subscribe if you want to know more about the geek world and sub the review of Invincible, Daredevil, and The Voice. We had a lot of content here. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next time. And Wetex, bye bye.